So I just wanted to welcome everybody to this book launch. It's 6:12 in England. I think it's 10 something in Chicago, and in Brazil 2 something. So please make a cup of tea for yourself or coffee, or open a bottle of wine, whatever you prefer. Thank you everybody to be here with us. This book launch was planned to take place during the Festival of Culture, which happens every year at UCL, University College London, around this time in June. But like all other face-to-face activities at probably all universities around the world, the Festival of Culture has been canceled. So here we are. There is a positive side for it because we are able to have so many collaborators from Brazil and United States tonight, and also participants all over the UK, Glasgow including, and Brazil, Porto Alegre, Belo Horizonte, Maryland, Chicago, etc. So as you know, the book is online, so you can publish, you can consult the book online for free on the website of the university. I can project for you the website if you want. It's for free, but if you want to buy the paper copy, £25, hardback, £45. So actually, I think it makes sense to run this event online because we are just being a bit more environmental friendly. And for me, it's a big advantage because I can wear flip-flops without doing my nails. It's a big advantage. This is the second book I organized with Sandra, and Comparative Perspectives on the Rise of the Brazilian Novel is the result of a long-term collaboration between Sandra and myself, and more recently between CELCS, UCL, and FEFELESH, USP. And the idea of this book came from my first year module, the Brazilian novel, which I teach at UCL. I have many students who have never read any novel in Portuguese, so they inevitably are inclined to compare the Brazilian novels we examine in the module to the novels that they are more familiar with, so Spanish, French, English novels. But there is, among the students, also a genuine interest in comparative literature. Sandra?
I needed, yeah, I was going to ask you to sort of stop your presentation. Thanks. Well, I would like to welcome everybody, say hello to those who came later and we didn't have the chance to talk to before we started officially. And I'm responsible for, let's say, making a general presentation of the book project. But before that, I would like to, well, apart from saying hello to everybody, I would like to stress that the book, or this book particularly, is one of the results of the cooperation between USP and UCL, which has comprised of late a few visits on both sides, and the 2 books that Anna and I have edited together and which she has just referred to. So, and of course this idea, I mean, comparative perspectives is the embodiment of at least 2 years of planning and hard work. So we are very, very happy to have it available to everybody, to have it launched, officially launched today. I was going to say this afternoon, but that does not apply to everybody. So when Anna suggested we could propose this volume to UCL Press, our main purpose was to bring the period of the rise of the Brazilian novel into conversation with foreign models and traditions. The book examines how individual Brazilian novels negotiate their place in the process of the dissemination of the genre worldwide. Some questions have guided the project. First of all, how could a literary form rising in and from a specific historical context, that of the emergence of the European bourgeoisie and capitalism, travel and take root in other territories? The second question, how did it accommodate to its new cultural environment? How did it translate a new reality and different contents across linguistic boundaries? How and to what extent did it change in face of new uses, new situations in a new place and time? In order to answer these questions, we look into the notions of center and periphery and work with the concepts of placement and displacement, centering and decentering, to explore the possibilities opened by the understanding of the novel as a transnational genre. That is, a genre that, though rooted in specific context, has from its origins spread and transgressed national borders. The book is also an attempt to reread and reconceptualize the rise of the novel in Brazil and challenge the idea that French novels were prominent and predominant in this process. As the chapters in our volume show, we take genre not as a constraint, but rather as a frame against which to measure the solutions Brazilian novelists came up with to tackle the problems that presented themselves to them, while at the same time challenging the notion of a purely nationally based literary formation as well. Contrary to the views current even today, one needs to complicate the idea that in the 19th century there was mere adaptation of important European ideas and artistic practices to the new environment, as some would still have it. Instead, there was never accommodation of foreign models, but novelists wrestling with the local matter they had on their hands in their attempt to shape it while looking to those models and to the context around them. So, when one moves the focus from the geography of Europe with its internal asymmetries, one needs to consider other disparities pertaining to the specific situation of Brazil and the Brazilian novel in relation to the more global historical and literary context. Perhaps no other Brazilian novelist synthesizes all these problems like Machado de Assis, whose work I discuss in my chapter as a true compendium of the genre. His oeuvre brings to light the tensions and the complexity of the dialectic between the local and universal, as he transcends national borders by acknowledging and incorporating the repertoire of the European novel without ignoring local material. So I would now like Anna to take over, because she's actually going to talk more specifically about the chapters in general, and then we would like to invite some of our contributors who are at the meeting to talk about their individual chapters. Anna?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. So there are 15 chapters in the book. including mine and Sandra's on Machado de Assis. I'll try to show you here the table of contents. So our chapters, my chapter and Sandra's come towards the end of the book, chapter 13 and 14. As Sandra has just mentioned, her chapter provides a very interesting lens to read Machado de Assis' novel, not only one, but all his 9 novels as a transnational genre, since Machado did not respect literary frontiers. Sandra argues that Machado de Assis ingeniously imploded the foundations of the novel. On the other hand, I'm going to focus on one novel, Dom Casmurro, and I compare it to Joseph Conrad's Lord Jim, which was published as well in 1900. In addition to providing a reading of Dom Casmurro as a queer narrative, I show that I consider Dom Casmurro an elegiac novel. And I also try to show that Machado was actually ahead of Conrad in his inclusion of mental processes and inner experiences manifested in the modernist novel. The book contains a good number of chapters on non-canonical novels that have no English translation. As we know, translation practices have perpetuated a Brazilian literary identity based on exclusively elite male canonical works and publishers. 4 chapters of the book are dedicated to novels by Brazilian women writers or women writers who wrote in Portuguese and contributed actively to the formation of the Brazilian literary system. None of these novels have been translated into English, so they are Juana Manso's Mistério del Plata, The Mysteries of the River Plate, Maria Firmina dos Reis' Ursula, published in 1859. Juana Manso's novel was published in 1852. Then we have Maria Benedita Câmara Bormann's Lesbia, published in 1884. And finally, Júlia Lopes de Almeida, A Falência, The Bankruptcy, published in 1901. I'll leave it to the collaborators to give you more details about their chapters. So we have today here, I hope everybody's there, Rita Teresa Schmidt, Cynthia Vezani, Eduardo de Assis Duarte is not online live with us, but he has made a video with subtitles in English. So if technology allows me to, I'm going to project the video. Then Heloísa Toller Gomes, who is going to talk about Escrava Isaura, The Slave Isaura, another novel, which, if I'm not mistaken, hasn't been translated into English. It's probably one of the most known Brazilian narratives of the 19th century because of the soap operas, but a translation in English is missing. Then Edu Teruki Otsaka is going to talk about Memória de Sargento de Milícias, Memoirs of a Militia Sergeant, which is one of the novels I taught, and his chapter has already been read by students. Jorge de Almeida is going to talk about The Magic Eyeglass. And finally, we close with another canonical author, José de Alencar, represented by Tiago Cas, with his chapter on Iracema. After the presentations, we can open for questions. So Rita, are you around? Hello? Maybe you have to unmute Rita. Let me see. Can anyone see Rita? a Rita levou. Yeah, there she is. On mute. Rita? Maybe we have to unmute.
Yes, should I start now?
Yes, yes. Perfect.
Yes, okay. I'm Rita Schmidt from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, southern Brazil. And I think that Ana has mentioned, I'm going to start with the first chapter. Mistérios del Plata, disfiguring history to forge a space for a woman's agency. Are you hearing me? Because I have started my video here on the keyboard. I think
Rita?
I should. Okay.
Rita, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
But it's so funny. I can see all of you. Share screen. Maybe I should.
No, you have to turn on you have to activate your screen.
Share screen.
Yes, activate your video.
Host, disable participant screen sharing. No, I don't want to disable.
Well,
I sent you an invitation to turn on your video. See if you have received it, Rita.
Participants, chat, share screen, record, reactions, start video, mute. I don't see.
Start video, please. That is the option.
Start video?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes, we can see you.
Yes, fine.
Finally. Okay,
now we can see you.
You know, this is the first time. First of all, I would like to thank Anna and Sandra, who conceived the project that resulted in this book that is being launched today. In my point of view, this collection of essays is a breakthrough in terms of understanding the development of the 19th century Brazilian novel. And I feel privileged to be part of this achievement and of being invited to join this conversation today with all my dear colleagues. Readers might wonder what a novel with a title in Spanish, Mistérios del Plata, and written by a woman born in Argentina named Juana Manso, have to do with the development of the 19th century Brazilian novel. In fact, this novel presents a sui generis case of a narrative that belongs to two distinct culturally and linguistically systems, the Brazilian one and the Argentinian one. Juana Manso was a member of a group of Argentinian intellectuals who fled the country during the dictatorship of Juan Manuel Rosas. The family sought exile in Brazil and settled down in Rio de Janeiro, where Manso founded and directed the first journal for women called the Ladies' Journal. She published Mistérios del Plata in a serialized fashion in this journal in 1852. And in 1867, the novel was published in the Argentinian journal Il Inválido Argentino. As a rule, 19th century Latin American women's writings have been largely invisible in the historiography as a result of critical assessments made on the grounds of aesthetic deficiencies, defined by the guardians of the so-called literary institution, male literary historians and critics who have always played a regulatory function within their national cultures. No wonder that Mistérios del Plata only became known to the Brazilian academic world in 2015 as a result of the efforts of a group of Brazilian female scholars committed to rescuing women's writings from their historical invisibility. So Mistérios del Plata is a historical novel, and its plot reveals a degree of influence of European novels, such as The Mysteries of Paris by Eugene Sue, mentioned in the prologue, as well as novels by Romantic writers such as Walter Scott, Victor Hugo, and Radcliffe. It is important to observe that at the time, European novels in their original language or in translations could be easily accessed in public libraries catalogs in Rio de Janeiro, and its role in the literary education of women from local elite classes cannot be overlooked. The novelty of Manso's project of nation narration lies on the fact that she not only engaged in the art of interpreting the dramatic circumstances and events of a nation split within itself, in the case Argentina, but she also ventured into the writing of a historical novel at a time when novels by women usually fell into the category of domestic fiction, sometimes also referred to as sentimental fiction. I would like to highlight two key aspects that answer for the novel's uniqueness in the context of the 19th century Brazilian culture, and I would even add in Latin American culture. First, the presence of a self-conscious female narrator who confesses the reason for writing a historical novel. In the prologue, the narrator makes clear her pedagogical intention, that is to unravel the mystery of Rosism, a specific historical period when Rosa's dictatorship brought about a very bloody fratricidal war in Argentina. As such, the novel brings to light issues and events that a national culture does not want to know or will not tell. This is the reason why the narrative is permeated by a haunted atmosphere. The second aspect that may account for the pioneer status of this text in Brazil is the conception of the female character, Antonia. Her agency in the public space to save her husband condemned to death for political treason against Rosa's regime becomes a patriotic mission attained with determination and bravery. In the subversion of traditional boundaries of women's role, Manso's female character ends up performing a key role in a crucial moment in the development of the narrative, and which brings about a decisive turn of events. With this move, Manso made an intervention in the socio-semantic field of what is defined as the hegemonic narratives of masculine nationality in the 19th century. The female character is energized by a heroic driving impulse in the defense of the political and moral integrity of her home country. And to save her husband from a death sentence, she uses a lot of strategies like dissimulation. She holds secret meetings with men whose party oppose Rosa. She forges official papers and dresses up as an official to enter the prison and manages to rescue the prisoner, her husband. Considering the novel and the essay she wrote entitled, more or less in the same period, The Moral Emancipation of Woman, published in the same year of her genre, exactly, there is no doubt that Manso's groundbreaking contribution to the feminist literary and social revolution that was going in the 19th century was very revealing. What I wanted to add is that this, what I call the feminist social revolution, was fueled by a desire for a reality for women beyond the limits set by historical contingency, a desire that is overrun but not extinguished by the pressing and inescapable necessity of narrating the nightmare of history. So this is what I prepare to say about the uniqueness of this novel. Thank you.
We can pass on to Cynthia, who has also written on another female writer, Júlia Lopes de Almeida. Her chapter is chapter 15.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. My name is Cynthia Cozona-Vizani. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Northwestern University, and I had the opportunity of contributing to this special project. Thank you so much, Anna and Sandra, for bringing us together with the chapter 15 entitled On Moral and Financial Bankruptcy, Adultery and Financial Speculation in A Falência by Júlia Lopes de Almeida. A Falência, published in 1901, is one of the few turn-of-the-century novels of adultery written by a Brazilian woman. It is also a novel about financial speculation. In connecting these two themes, Almeida simultaneously draws attention to the invisibility of the female labor that sustains the financial economy and to the fundamental role played by illusions and fantasies in both adultery and stock market speculation. The novel, which follows the misfortunes of a coffee-producing family in Rio de Janeiro, deploys a metaphor wherein the financial bankruptcy resulting from the father's and wife's speculations on the stock market is equated to the wife's model bankruptcy demonstrated by her infidelity. In each case, the characters are seduced, the former by the attraction of foreign capital, and the latter by the possibilities of sexual life outside the narrow confines of an arranged marriage. While Almeida's work prefigures the interventions of contemporary feminist economists, such as Catherine Marceau, who have detailed the foundational contribution of unpaid female labor to the rise of the modern capitalist economy, Almeida also recalls the triangulation established by Gustave Flaubert between adultery, illusions, and credit. While Emma Bovary mistakes romantic novels for real life, Flaubert and Almeida point to how financial capitalism similarly operates through a confusion between fantasies and reality. This chapter derives a critique of turn-of-the-century sexual norms and financial capitalism from Almeida's work and demonstrates how an emphasis on female solidarity distinguishes A Falência from the conventions of adultery novels predominantly written by men. To give you an idea of how Almeida, through her female protagonist, characterizes the treatment of women in fiction, consider the following quote, which is one of my favorites from the novel. So when her lover presents her with an adultery novel written by a man, the protagonist says, and I quote, "Male writers do not forgive women. They make us responsible for everything, as if we already did not pay a high price for the happiness we enjoy. In these books, I'm always afraid of the end. I rebel against the punishments they throw on us, and I feel desperate for not being able to shout at them, 'Hypocrites.'" End of quote. Men are hypocrites, Almeida's character insists, who engage in adultery but punish women for doing the same. In A Falência, Almeida departs from a literary convention of punishing sexually transgressive women and instead launches a subtle critique of financial capitalism, which causes much more widespread damage to society's families than any adulteress could ever cause, but whose agents are rarely held accountable for their actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's again one of these novels that are not translated into English. We are trying to get it translated, hopefully, fingers crossed. We're gonna find a funding for the translator. The next chapter is on Ursula by Eduardo de Assis Duarte. Eduardo is not here. Eduardo is a professor full professor at Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais. He's a specialist on Machado de Assis and on Black literature. I'm going to try now to share the video that he has kindly sent to us. I may have to start it twice if the sound and image are not synchronized.
Boa noite a todas e todos. Vou falar com vocês um pouco a respeito da escritora brasileira Maria Firmina dos Reis. Ela é uma precursora, um caso raro de alguém muito além do seu tempo e do seu país. Filha de uma escrava alforriada, Maria Firmina não conheceu seu pai e perdeu a mãe aos 5 anos de idade. Ela nasceu em 1822, no Maranhão, nordeste do Brasil, e viveu 95 anos. Atravessou todo um século de guerras e revoluções, vindo a falecer em 1917, momento em que surgem no hemisfério norte as primeiras manifestações do pensamento negro moderno, de que é exemplo o New Negro Movement nos Estados Unidos. Maria Firmina dos Reis é precursora desse pensamento. Ela publica, em 1859, Ursula, que vem a ser o primeiro romance abolicionista da língua portuguesa. E primeiro romance também de autoria negra e feminina a ser publicado nas Américas. Pela primeira vez, a África e o tráfico transatlântico surgem na literatura brasileira. A África como um espaço de civilização, não é? Que é invadido pelo que ela chama de bárbaros europeus, e o porão do navio negreiro como aquele espaço de agonia e morte. E há mais. Em Ursula, a voz narrativa adota o ponto de vista das vítimas da escravização. Ela faz do negro referência moral da narrativa. Ou seja, no livro há homens bons e maus, mas se algum deles é bom, ele é porque ele é tão bom quanto o negro. Em tudo isso, Maria Firmina dos Reis antecipa a moderna consciência negra do negro de que fala o filósofo Achille Mbembe. Essa consciência negra do negro, ela vai estar presente, não é? Na nascença do Harlem, na negritude francófona e em toda a tradição da literatura afrodiaspórica do século XX.
Could you hear and see all right? Yeah? Perfect. Yes. I had to use my Bose speakers to project the sound and the image at the same time. Okay, it worked. I'm very glad. And I'm very glad that Eduardo had the trouble to do the subtitles with the help of his son. What couldn't we do without the new generation? So now I think it's Heloísa. Heloísa is going to wrote on a escravizaura. Is Heloísa, are you there?
Yes, yes.
Oh, perfect.
Tá, começo então?
Sim.
Boa tarde a todos. Eu sou Heloísa Toller Gomes, da Universidade do Estado do Rio de Janeiro. Também sou pesquisadora do PAC da UFRJ. O título do meu artigo, que é o capítulo 8 do livro, é Silences and Voices of Slavery, a escravizaura and Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Bom, antes eu gostaria de agradecer às organizadoras pela acolhida do meu trabalho e agradeço também a oportunidade muito grata de estar com vocês hoje. Bom, eu trato no meu artigo de 2 textos de tese abolicionista. Escravizaura, de 1875, escrito e publicado no calor da campanha abolicionista no Brasil, é, sem dúvida, o romance abolicionista mais célebre do romantismo brasileiro. Seu autor, Bernardo Guimarães, pertencia às elites culturais de seu tempo e país. Já Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, publicado clandestinamente em 1861, foi escrito por uma mulher negra, foragida da escravidão, foragida do sul escravocrata nos Estados Unidos. Seu pseudônimo, Linda Brent. Isaura é uma obra ficcional, mas contém nítidos elementos de realidade histórica. Incidents apresenta explicitamente como não ficção. É uma autobiografia ou uma slave narrative, contendo, porém, elementos de ficcionalidade. Apesar desses contrastes de postura narrativa, as duas obras se encontram na encenação de um discurso político que aborda a questão sociopolítica mais dramática da época, a escravidão. Isaura e Incidents abrem uma janela sobre a vida na sociedade escravista no Brasil e nos Estados Unidos. A análise depara-se, através desses 2 textos, com um amplo painel discursivo em que se desdobram questões como as relações interraciais, os preconceitos de raça, gênero, classe, a situação da mulher, a mulher negra escravizada e a branca da classe senhorial, a sexualidade, a religiosidade, a família, o casamento, a maternidade, a morte, são questões que as duas obras abordam, o mais das vezes corajosamente. Note-se bem, não são só vozes que soam neste corpo discursivo formado pela conjunção dos 2 textos. Há também pesados e eloquentes silêncios que revelam em sombras aquilo que não se pode dizer. Entre as vozes e os silêncios, articula-se e delineia-se a análise comparatista. A literatura comparada hoje se quer pluralista, sem etnocentrismos e hierarquizações de toda espécie, na formação de novos cânones, tratando de literaturas marginais, hegemônicas, tratando de entre-lugares e de não-lugares. A literatura comparada propicia inéditas composições e combinações textuais e enceta cruzamentos interdisciplinares ao interrogar os limites tradicionais das disciplinas acadêmicas. Acolhe possibilidades inovadoras de teorização comparatista. Tudo isso procuramos detalhar em nossa leitura, ou ao menos um pouco disso. Tudo isso é um pouco pretensioso dizer. A Escravizaura e Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl tratam de seu tempo e lugar, mas transcendem o século XIX e seus questionamentos transbordam para a nossa conturbada época. O legado secular de violência e desigualdades da escravidão persiste e é palpável e sangra. Daí o vigor dessa dupla denúncia que a literatura comparada permite unir e conciliar. Daí a atualidade desse distante protesto. Atualidade essa que, segundo espero, este estudo consiga fazer justiça. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, Heloísa. Eu vou passar já para o Edu. So I hand over to Edu Otsuka.
Olá, boa tarde, boa noite. Eu vou falar em português também. Também quero começar parabenizando os organizadores do livro. E eu sou Edu Otsuka, da Universidade de São Paulo, sou autor do segundo capítulo sobre as memórias de um sargento de milícias. Eu começo o capítulo apresentando algumas linhas gerais da interpretação do Antônio Cândido no famoso ensaio Dialética da Malandragem. O estudo mais importante que há sobre as memórias de um sargento de milícias, e nele o Antônio Cândido descreveu a organização formal do livro como uma dialética de ordem e desordem, e demonstrou a unidade profunda do romance, estabelecendo uma correlação entre a estrutura do sargento de milícias, a estrutura interna do sargento de milícias, e uma dinâmica específica da sociedade brasileira vista através do setor dos homens livres não proprietários. Essa lógica social que o sargento de milícias incorpora como um princípio organizador é o complexo de relações clientelistas, relações de favor e dependência características do Brasil do século XIX. De fato, esse conjunto de relações de favor e dependência é decisivo para o destino dos personagens, e em particular para o desfecho do romance. Ao mesmo tempo, porém, a maior parte dos episódios envolve uma espécie de subproduto das relações de favor. Esses episódios são quase sempre marcados por pequenos conflitos, rivalidades e vinganças. São conflitos que organizam o que eu chamo de estrutura de rixas. Uma estrutura de rixas que define o andamento dos episódios do romance e revela uma outra dimensão dessas relações que regem a sociedade. A inclinação para as rixas surge como uma tentativa de afirmação de superioridade social por parte daqueles que estão destituídos de poder efetivo. E esse conjunto de relações também corresponde a um efeito dessas relações sociais que predominam no Brasil oitocentista. E, por fim, eu procuro indicar o lugar do sargento de milícias no desenvolvimento do romance brasileiro antes do Machado de Assis, tendo em vista as soluções formais que os escritores deram para o problema da discrepância entre os pressupostos sociais e ideológicos do romance europeu, da forma do romance europeu, e a matéria social brasileira. Brevemente é isso. Obrigado.
Obrigada, Edu. Então, eu passo a palavra para o Jorge, que vai falar escreveu sobre a luneta mágica.
So, hi, everyone. Boa tarde, boa noite. Eu sou Jorge de Almeida, da Universidade de São Paulo. Thanks, Anna and Sandra. Congratulations on the introduction and all the efforts to edit and publish this important book on comparative literature. I'm very, very happy to have had the opportunity to take part in this volume. My chapter is about an amazing but not so well-known novel, not yet translated in English, A Luneta Mágica, The Magic Eyeglass, by an important romantic Brazilian writer, Jorge de Almeida. Oh, Joaquim Manuel de Macedo. I tried to develop the idea that, as in other peripheral national literatures in the 18th and 19th centuries, Brazilian writers and literary critics
I think Jorge had a connection problem. shall we move to Tiago, and we see when he's back?
I'm back here.
There he is. Okay.
Power failure here to my house. So I tried to develop the idea that, as in other peripheral national literatures in the 18th and 19th centuries, Brazilian writers and literary critics from the start faced the problem of how to interpret that the value and originality of literary works that had foreign, mainly French and English novels as implicit or explicit models. I remember the great Brazilian critic Antônio Cândido, who argued that to study Brazilian literature always entails doing comparative literature. With regard to the novel, a genre that has been international by nature since its beginnings, there are two important topics concerning its subgenres and displacement throughout the world. How the novel rose in different countries and how its forms acclimatized in historical conditions other than those of modern Europe. To discuss it, I reconsidered in my essay the important work of Ian Watt on the rise of the English novel, trying to demonstrate how his theory could be useful in negative and read against the grain to explain the peculiarities of the concept of individual experience in Brazil's early novels, and how these differences, based on a slavery society full of contradictions, affect not only the content, but mainly the form of Macedo's novels. Well, I have already read other essays in the volume. I have learned a lot, and I think this whole book constitutes a great and beautiful contribution to comparative studies in Brazilian literature. So congratulations to all my dear colleagues, and again to Ana and Sandra. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. Thank you for writing this chapter, and thank you for coming to UCL once a year to speak to my students about a Luneta Mágica. This is even better.
It's always a pleasure, Ana.
Good. Okay, so we have now Tiago Cas on Iracema. Are you there, Tiago?
Yes, here I am.
Good.
Hi, this is Tiago Bezerra Cas, and I teach British literature at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And I'll briefly introduce the book's 5th chapter, entitled A Suspicious Sound Interrupted the Gentle Harmony, Iracema by José de Alencar. Well, taking my cue from a vile piece of 19th century racist rhetoric, Paulo Sousa's account of his expedition to Paraguay during the War of the Triple Alliance, I discuss how Alencar's contemporaries tended to be oblivious to the fissures in his most influential novel, Iracema, published in 1865. Traditionally, Iracema has been read as refiguring the colonial encounter with a marriage plot that harkens back to the formula codified in British and Irish Unionist novels. In a story of star-crossed lovers, a Tabajara priestess and a Portuguese conquistador end up producing a biracial son who stands as a symbol of conciliation. As any meager paraphrase will show, however, interracial coupling in Iracema imposes unequal obligations to Amerindians, as the novel's title character, Iracema, dies shortly after childbirth. Paulo Sousa, the bigot I mentioned a minute ago, states, and I am sorry if this passage causes offense, he states that the native populations of Paraguay brought back to his mind, quote, that beautiful poem by Mr. Alencar, Iracema, in which he, Alencar, makes the Indian so beautiful, intelligent, and poetical, whilst Paulo Sousa only saw natives as ugly, stupid, and swinish. I argue that in a few repetitive lines, Paulo Sousa's nauseating piece of unbridled bigotry, probably unbeknownst to its author, foregrounds a very prominent feature of Iracema, its aestheticized language, which ultimately dilutes the novel's rendering of colonial conflicts. Indeed, Iracema departs from Alencar's former strategy of inscribing in linguistic terms racial and cultural tensions, a strategy long associated with Walter Scott's historical novels. Rather, Iracema is famously, or notoriously, overridden by a heightened poetical, or shall I say oceanic, language that makes narrator and characters speak, if not in unison, at least with indistinguishable voices. As Paulo Sousa indicates, this ostensible sonic homogeneity frequently makes the novel sound like, quote unquote, a beautiful poem, whereby even the text's sacrificial core may be muffled by overarching cadences and tropes and discarded as irrelevant or non-existent. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank everybody in my name and Anna's name for your presentations, all our contributors. Well, I would also like to remind those who are with us that there are other such interesting interesting chapters in the book for you to browse, for you to explore. And now I think we can open to questions, comments, suggestions, curiosity, or whatever you feel like talking about, or whatever you feel like commenting on. So we are all here to listen to you now. So the floor is open. I know it must be hard to ask questions about something that is being presented in such a summary and short way, but maybe, I mean, if you would like to, or if you have questions about the nature of the book, or perhaps more general questions about what we have called comparative perspectives, we are here to answer them. Where are you, Anna? I can't see Anna anymore. Perhaps Anna should join me.
Me?
Yeah, you. Perhaps, take the floor with me and see if anybody would like to say anything or to ask anything. It's a pity we cannot invite you all for, a glass of wine, because this would be the time for us to, let's say, celebrate the publication of the book on a glass of red wine or white wine, but this was the original plan, and unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had to give it up.
May I
Yes,
say
Eloisa.
about the translation of Escravizaura? Well, the novel has not been, surprisingly, it has not been translated, but the soap opera, which was enormously celebrated all over the world, of course, has been translated in several languages. And it made a great success in Japan, for instance. So perhaps it's easier to find copies of the novel Escravizaura. About 10
Soap opera.
I said the novel?
Yeah.
No.
Yes, because it's easy, right? The confusion is not. I mean, it's easy. It's easy to make. Yes, we would like to remind you that the book can be downloaded for free. And then, you know, I think this is an invitation for everybody to have a look at it, read the other chapters or have an idea about the other chapters. It's a pity the other contributors could not be with us today or tonight. And I don't know, would anybody else like to say anything?
May I ask something?
Yes, of course. Sorry, Igor, right?
It's about, yes, it's about the title. First of all, congratulations to you all. It seems an excellent book. Looking forward to reading it. It's my question is about the rise, the rise of the Brazilian novel. Well, the impression I had, you thought the rise in terms of the rise of the genre in Brazil. Do you also discuss the rise of the genre abroad in terms of like how Brazilian novels being received nowadays, or like all these translation issues, the fact that we still have a lot of Brazilian novels to be translated, or how they are being received? Do you discuss anything about that? This is one question. And the other one is like, how do you conceive of this idea of rise of the novel? Because this span is quite large, isn't it? It's almost like the whole 19th century and beginning of 20th century. How did you think about that? Could you like expand a bit on it?
I can talk about the translations first. We discussed briefly in the introduction the issue of the translations, the availability of these novels in English. For example, whereas all novels by Machado de Assis have been translated, and sometimes translated more than once. José de Alencar's novel have been available in English since the 19th century. Novels published by small publishers and by women, but also the case of a popular erotic novel, which is examined in the book. They are not republished in Brazil, so they only become available after a long archival research of over 30 years. So because they are not considered relevant, you know, they weren't considered relevant for many years in Brazilian historiography, they don't have translations either. So it's very difficult to teach 19th century Brazilian literature and include female writers in the syllabus, because the novels are not translated if you're teaching, as in my case, ab initio. And we made an effort, even though they are not translated, we made an effort to include a chapter on escravizaura, Juana Manso, Júlia Lopes de Almeida. Yes, although they are not translated. So hopefully there is some interest in these novels and in the English-speaking world.
Can I perhaps try to, there's a question there for you later on, Anna, but let me just make a comment on what Igor has just asked. I think perhaps if I understood your point, Igor, you correct me if I'm wrong. What you're suggesting is that whether we have thought or not about the reception of the Brazilian novels out of Brazil, outside Brazil. That I think that would be another book, to be quite honest. That would be another book project, which we might even think about in the future. That would be a good thing to study, to explore, to investigate. And I think one of the problems has to do exactly with the lack of translations. Unless, novelists abroad could actually read Portuguese, it would be very hard for them to. I mean, how do we measure? How do we work on the reception, on the dissemination of these novels abroad? Okay, so that's one problem, I think. And it's something that would need a lot of research for us to think about the impact they may have made on other novelists and other traditions. That's, I don't know if that answers your first question. And the second question, sorry, yes, Igor?
Yes, it does, thanks. That's,
yeah, because I mean, that would be really, I think that's a very good suggestion, to be quite honest. Something we might even take up, if that is possible at all. And the second thing that, the second question you ask, why do we cover such a long period, right? I would say that we were actually trying to think of the rise of the novel in Brazil as a process, okay, as a long process, something that does not, because in England, we normally, if you take Ian Watt's book, for example, he actually sort of concentrates on a very, very short period of time, if you think about it. He concentrates on the three main founding fathers, let's say, but then he also leaves a lot of things out. Okay, so three main novelists. But as a matter of fact, I think the whole process in Brazil takes much longer to solidify, right? To actually sort of crystallize. And then I would also like to bring Antonio Cândido back again into the conversation, because as a matter of fact, he also thinks of the formação da literatura brasileira as a process that will reach its sort of, say, its completion with Machado. So, which is more or less what we have done, but we have also decided to include Júlia Lopes de Almeida, who was writing, I mean, she's actually more or less contemporary to Machado. No, not more or less, she's writing at the same time as Machado. So we would think that, you know, we are really trying to actually cover this long process. I don't know if that explains what we had in mind.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Anna, there's a question for you.
I think Rita had a question before, or a comment to do. Rita?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My internet is very unstable today, so maybe that's why we have this break in my seeing you and you hearing me. What I wanted to say is that when we consider the continental size of Brazil and its many different regions in the 19th century, we can say that literature or the novel was a genre that developed most of the regions of Brazil. And this is, I agree with Sandra, this is a process that takes over the whole 19th century. For example, in the southern states, we have novels that appeared in the first half of the 19th century and in the second half of the 19th century, as well as in the Northeast, for example. So I agree completely with Sandra in terms of this broad range of novelistic narratives that were produced during the century. And we still don't have in Brazil an academic work that would cover all this production, at least the production that have been tracked down by researchers of the 19th century. Another thing that I wanted to say is that this book, as it is, even though we don't have translations into English, it's really a source for comparative researches outside Brazil. And this is a very important achievement to let others know about the novelistic production in Brazil. And I would maybe ask Anna to see someone who could write a book review of this volume to be sent to the journal of the International Comparative Literature Association. We do have a journal called Literary Research, and it would have to be someone who writes in English, because the two official languages of the association are English and French. But this would be a book that deserves a review in this journal. And since the Comparative Literature Association has branches all over the world, you know, people from different places would maybe be interested in the Brazilian novel, and some translations might originate out of this interest. So this is my suggestion.
Forgot to activate my microphone. There's a question for Ana from Joyce. Joyce, are you there? She says, I have a question for Professor Suriani, but maybe she's given up.
Oh, she wrote. Could you tell us a bit more about how you approach Brazilian literature in your courses? In the contest. Well, we do a lot of close reading, definitely. I like the old school of close reading. And of course, first year students, they're going to be reading in English, and we have to choose a small amount of novels. So actually, I work on 5 novels. So it's a combination of close reading and trying to show the diversity of the genre in Brazil, and the diversity of connections, you know, between Brazilian literature and European literature. So we work on Memórias de Sargento de Milícias and Iracema, Dom Casmurro, Pagu, and Macunaíma, just to give an idea about the different types of novels that were being produced in Brazil, from romantic novels to modernist, and doing a lot of close reading. So it's a mix of close reading and trying to give the students as much as possible of context, historical context. Some of them don't even know that there was slavery in Brazil, so it's quite new, everything for them. So of course we do the best we can, and I think by doing close reading is at the end of the day the best approach, I think.
I think there was a second part of her question.
Huh?
She has another question. She also asks, in this context, what are students most interested in?
Oh yes, they are very interested in women writers, narratives of slavery, and so I tried. In the first year, it's very difficult to, for example, I cannot teach Ursula because it hasn't been translated. I cannot teach A Escravizaura. But for my final year students who can already read in Portuguese, so I teach short stories, and I include as many female writers as possible, including A Escrava by Maria Firmina dos Reis. So they're very interested in women writers and narratives of slavery.
There's another question for you, Anna, from Katia. I think it's in the chat. If you want to read, I can read it to you, or you can read it yourself if you would like to. It's a, would you like me to read it for you?
Yeah,
you found it?
Curious about
yes,
students' reaction to the very messy culture they get through Brazilian literature in general, let alone from the 19th century. I think I always start with Memórias de Sargento de Milícias, which shows how European systems, political, police, are implemented in Brazil and the mess that it's created because of that. And I think it's always with humor. So what predominates is a bit of humor, how we adapt, how a big group of people who have no access to wealth and land, they adapt to and survive in the country. So although it's messy, I think they see a pattern, you know, they learn a lot from what is going on in Brazil now, reading 19th century literature, from Memórias de Sargento de Milícias in Iracema, the story that we find peace through love, that Iracema tries to sell to everyone. So I think they're quite interested in these underlying Brazilian culture that come across already in these 19th century novels.
Are there any other questions? Not that I can read any questions here in the chat. Would anybody like to say anything else?
I see a question to me from Mariana.
Where is that? I missed it. Ah, yes, you have a question. Sorry, Eloisa, yes.
Yes, are you hearing me? Everybody's hearing me?
Yes,
I don't know.
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if I will be able to like elaborate, like my English is not so good, but I don't know if she prefers if I'm asking English or in Portuguese.
You're right.
What do you prefer?
In Portuguese or in English. If you're saying you choose.
I will try. So you are comparing Escravizaura, an American novel, written by a slavery woman. And I wish you could say something about the fact, like Escravizaura was wrote by a man, and white men from the elites, and the other one was wrote by a black woman who was actually enslaved. So what do you think about the difference between the main character? Because her main character is a black woman, and his main character is a enslaved woman, but she's white. Mm-hmm. What do you can say about it?
Well, we may say to start with that slavery in Escravizaura is seen from the outside, because the author is a white man belonging to the elites. So he saw slavery from the outside. And in the North American book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, slavery is seen and lived and suffered from the inside. But in our reading of the two novels, in our comparative readings, in my attempt to do it, I avoided to say that one side complements the other. Instead, I made use of the concept created by Jacques Derrida of the supplement, instead of the idea of complementing. The notion of the supplement helps us to see these differences without the idea of one completing what is lacking in the other. So this I try to explain and develop in the text. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't read the rest.
This sort of difference, I preferred to concentrate on the notion of the voices and the silences, what is seen and said, and what is impossible to express. So the silences express a lot. And we have tremendous silences, very eloquent silences in Isaura and in incidents. More so in Isaura in terms of the knowledge of what is inside the slave quarters, which Bernardo Guimarães avoids. Whereas we have the inside of the slave quarters and life among the slaves, and all the slaves are black. We don't have a woman slave who has the look of a Spanish woman, as is the case of Isaura, even though in Escrava Isaura it's very clear that she has what the book says, black or African blood. But she looks, in order to be a romantic heroine, Bernardo Guimarães makes Isaura not only beautiful, but also looking an Italian woman, a Napolitan woman, or a Spanish woman, to make the creation of a black heroine acceptable to the public he had in mind. This is completely different in the case of the American novel, which I have the pleasure of showing to you. This is the cover of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, which I recommend. I hope I have answered your question.
Can I follow up? This is James Dean on this just a little bit here, and I'll throw a powder keg into the discussion because I want to tie in sex, politics, and expand the horizons beyond the 19th century back to the 17th century and forward. For just a moment anyway. First of all, the thesis that I would present is that as soon as you get a political situation that is untenable and intolerable, various things happen. Like a watermelon seed, they squirt out in directions you don't expect. One of them is in Osman Lisa's novel, Avoluvara, where it's a very sexy novel, but it's also highly political. And they do things which are not to be countenanced because of the political situation. Now, let me go back now to 1688. And here is a woman writing. She's the first of the women writers in English literary history, Afro-Ben, B-E-H-N. And she spent some time in Suriname, about six months or so, where she was there on the mission from the king to unmask the cruelties of the then British governor, which she did. Now, she wrote a novel about this in the year before her death called Orinoco. Orinoco, as opposed to the Orinoco, the Rio Orinoco. And it's about an African slave and his bride who are taken to Suriname and made to work in the sugar fields. And it's a violent novel, just as Avoluvara is a violent novel in the 60s, 1960s. So I'd like to get Eloise's interpretation of this, because here you have the first female writer writing about a female and a male slaves within, well, Suriname, just to the north of Brazil these days. And how these can be, are these things related? Do you find this within Brazilian literature that when there is a political aberrance, this is followed by social aberrance as well? I leave it to you.
I don't know, Professor Dean, how to answer you because I'm not acquainted with these works. So
Yeah.
Sure, your question.
Yeah, very few people are. Afro-Ben, the novel, by the way, was a flop. It didn't succeed until it went onto the stage with some notable actors, an actor and an actress playing the title roles, that it became a hit. It reminds me in a way of some other works too. It reminds me of Guimarães Rosa's Sertão. It reminds me of, in other words, I see a connection between British literature, early British literature of the 17th century, and what you're saying about the 19th and the 20th.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, about slavery and the treatment of slavery in literature. I hope this does not go beyond the point, but I would like to recommend to everybody interested in the issue of slavery in Brazilian literature to read Yesterday, if possible,
Uh-huh.
A Morta, de Cornélio Pena. Even though having been written already well into the 20th century, A Menina Morta is a portrait of slavery and the decadence of the slave society, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful portraits of slavery that exists not only in Brazilian literature, but in literature in general. Not being an abolitionist text, it does not defend any thesis, but it's a representation of slavery that is a masterpiece.
Oh, let me add too that the connection goes on because England in the 17th century was a terrible place to live. It wasn't merry old England by any means. There was the killing of a king. There was the interregnum. Then Charles II came along with his French habits, and there was inflation. There was bad employment, poor harvests. It was a terrible place to live, and so when Afro-Ben writes her Orinoco, it's not a good novel. It's a terrible novel. But it's historically important there. I'm not surprised that anyone has read the thing. Very few have. But it's important historically, I'd say. It's the penultimate chapter of the book I'm working on right now. Her story, her unmasking of the deputy governor and the proprietor in Suriname and Barbados. The beginning of the book begins with Sir Walter Raleigh, and he was there because he'd done something too under Elizabeth, which was not countenanced by her nor her court, and he was ostracized. And he goes to Guyana to try to regain her good graces, which he didn't do. And the second time he went, which was 17, 18, he went to try to save his life, and that didn't work either. Anyway, my point is that violence in the political sphere begets violence within the bedroom.
Anyway. Sorry, James, sorry. Tiago, would you like to make any comments since you have, I know you have been talking about Orinoco very recently. So we're sort of moving away from comparative perspectives, but I don't know if you have any comments.
Okay. One thing is just very interesting to draw the parallel of Orinoco to one of the earliest novelistic texts in the so-called English/British traditions, is that it is a text that Afro-Ben, female writer, uses or mobilizes realist, quote-unquote, realist techniques in order to intervene in the sort of the political debate. And this strategy is, to a large extent, picked up by early Brazilian novelists as well, because the novel in Britain, in its very early stages, crystallizes as a sort of textual space whereby women can use in order to intervene in the sort of public sphere. I think this process more or less takes place in Brazil as well, in which we see women who were largely ostracized from taking part in discursive communities of the law, of philosophy, of theology, using the novel to intervene in broader political debates such as the abolition of the slave trade and of slavery. I don't know whether I've made myself clear, but I think that we can draw another parallel between not only the theme of Orinoco, but the process of women picking up the form of the novel to intervene in the political arena. We see this in Britain, and we shall see this later on in Brazil.
Thank you, Tiago, for your comment. Can I take one last question from Joyce? Joyce has a question here, and I'm taking this one last question, and then Anna and I will thank everybody, and then we'll sort of end the session. I suppose everybody has, other commitments, and we don't want to take your time for too long. So, question, if I were to teach, well, Joyce seems to be very much worried about teaching. If you were to teach an undergraduate course on Machado justice in England today, would you go the Stern route mainly? I don't know. Joyce is asking that question because she knows that I'm working on Machado and Stern. I don't know. I've never given it a thought, to be quite honestly. That might be one possibility. It depends. The thing is, with Stern, you would be sort of restricted to discussing posthumous memoirs. But then, it would depend on what the whole structure of the course would be. So it depends, Joyce. I really don't know. So, shall we call it a day? And as I said, again, we would like to thank you very much for joining us on this very improvised sort of meeting, because as a matter of fact, we were supposed to be meeting all personally. The pandemic has changed all our plans, but let's pretend we are all sharing a glass of wine at the moment, and I hope you all keep safe, take good care of yourselves, and I hope the pandemic sort of allows us to get us back to our normal lives